I was 14 when I had my first child. My dad was an alcoholic and an abuser, and my mom was a recovering coke addict, living somewhere else, playing house with her new husband and my half-brothers. I barely even remember her face. I remember my dad, or more accurately, I remember the shadow of my dad. He had a huge, bulging dark shadow stumbling through the tight corridors of our house, drunk and debilitated, crawling into my childhood bed and ignoring tears and screams, stumbling back out, picking up a beer that he had placed on my nightstand, burping loudly. He'd be passed out either on the floor or the couch, or occasionally his bed when I woke up. I'd make him breakfast in a kitchen that smelled foul of cat shit and spilled booze, and he would maybe be sober when I went to school, but never when I returned. Most nights he didn't touch me, but sometimes he did. The routine of taking care of him was exhausting. My mind felt empty, most of the time, mechanical almost. I felt like a car on the verge of breaking down, just focusing on staying on the road, whatever the cost. I didn't notice the first couple of times I missed my period. I was a kid, barely cracked 14, and I didn't know how to track it. My mom hadn't exactly taught me well. I noticed I was gaining weight. I didn't notice anything else. I didn't care about anything. I was smoking at the time as well. I've always regretted that. I can't stand smoking now. The dark smell and heavy feeling, it all makes me sick to my stomach. I gave birth to a boy one night my dad was out, in excruciating pain, on the floor of our kitchen with my cat by my side. I had assisted her in delivering litters before, so I liked to think she'd help me as well. I suppose my boy was premature, because he was very small, in comparison to the children I've had since then, but I don't know for sure. He looked like my dad. I looked at his little bloodied face, the way he was crying, the way his scrunched up features looked monstrous, the way his eyes looked like my dad's, and I decided I cared as much about this boy as I did his dad. He was as much a mistake in my eyes as I was. And I thought about all the times I had prayed to God that he'd kill me before I had the chance to wake up. I made it quick, strangled him with a shoelace, hid him in the closet for a few days until the smell became too strong. Then I threw him in the lake on the way to school. I hid him in my backpack and the rot held on the fabric for weeks. I wasn't really worried about anyone finding him. Nobody looks for someone who isn't missing. I suppose I should have been guilty, and I am now. But back then, I truly felt nothing. I was droning through life. I got into therapy when I was in high school. I inherited money from my piece of shit grandmother, and I spent it on this, instead of college. It was without doubt the best decision I've ever made. I'm a social worker now. I take care of people. I have a husband and 2 beautiful girls. We're happy. We're quiet. I'm not supremely well educated, and I'm not the best at apologizing for my mistakes. But I live. I sleep with a nightlight on, but I don't flinch from my husband's shadow. He knows the gist about my childhood, the alcohol, the yelling, the stench of shit on me every day. He doesn't know about my boy. It never felt like a burden I was meant to share. I carried him until I didn't, and then I killed him. It was a story that started and ended with me. But a few days after my boy died, I started hearing him. First, it would be cries as I was falling asleep, that shrill, demented cry he had managed to screech when he was born, but twisted in accordance with his mangled vocal cords, from a shoelace tied around his tiny neck like a bow tie. After a few weeks, I started seeing him. Once again, it was only when I was falling asleep, for the last few minutes before the dark takes over, and he would be lying on the floor, helpless and blue, gasping after air and crying his little lungs empty. It continued like that. It still does. When I wake up in sleep paralysis, he's still there, lying on the floor, blue and increasingly rotten, begging for the death I had handed him. But when I wake up for real, there's nothing, of course. He's grown up in front of me. The child who used to be a baby is a man now. He'd be 32 this year, and the boy I see does indeed look 32. His face is sunken and blue, and he is still just lying on the floor, shitting and screaming, and his naked body is frightfully skinny. Sometimes in my paralysis, he will try to reach out to touch me, but he can't stand, and I can't move. I wish I could. I wish I could collect him up in my arms and rock him to sleep, this man who is my boy, and I wish I could apologize and explain, but I am where I am, and he is where he is. Except for a night a few weeks ago, he got up. He stood, not straight, and definitely not surely, but he stood. He stretched his bony hand out to me, and I was so afraid he'd strike me, or choke me, or hurt me, might even kill me. I wouldn't blame him. He didn't. Obviously, he stroked my cheek, fairly roughly, but not maliciously, and he smiled. His teeth were black, and his smile was unpleasant, but the surge I felt in my stomach was almost happiness. Could you believe it? My boy's smiling. I got the call in the morning. My dad had been found dead, choked on his own vomit, the same disgusting apartment I grew up in. They're gonna need a hazmat team to clean it all. I felt nothing at the news, except maybe relief, but even that would be too extreme of a descriptor. My husband and I danced in the kitchen in celebration. My boy didn't show up that night. He hasn't since. I have all faith that he killed our father, that he made him choke on himself, on all the sick he brought into the world, on his own disgusting stomach acid burning its way through his shell of a body. My boy doesn't show up anymore, and in a way that makes me sad, as stupid as that might sound, to miss a specter of your own guilt, and in a way, the fact that I mourn him now makes me almost deliriously happy.